The rain in Cheongdam-dong had a strange way of making the city look lonelier than usual. It fell in fine silver lines against the glass windows of the tall, narrow building on the corner of Dazendaro. Soft enough to be almost silent yet heavy enough to stain the sidewalks with a glossy melancholic sheen. On the 11th floor of that building, inside a dimly lit studio that smelled faintly of roasted coffee and cold air, Lee Chae stepped in quietly, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his oversized coat. There was no manager beside him, no PR staff pacing behind him with anxious eyes, no entourage of stylists adjusting his hair before the cameras rolled. He had chosen to come alone. The staff felt it instantly, the heaviness in his breathing, the quietness of his footsteps, the contemplative stillness of his expression. He wasn't there to promote a drama. He wasn't there for a magazine shoot. He wasn't even there because his agency had arranged it. He came because he had something to say. Something he had kept inside his chest for far too long. Something that had turned his nights into long, echoing tunnels of emptiness. The studio lights were kept low on purpose, casting a soft golden glow over the small wooden table and the two chairs facing each other. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't staged, it wasn't designed for aesthetics. It was designed for truth. For the quiet kind, the kind that only surfaces when all the noise of fame is stripped away. When Chae took his seat, he didn't smile right away. His eyes scanned the window beside him. Raindrops sliding down the glass. He could see the neon lights from Apgujeong reflecting like blurry constellations. The city felt distant, as if Seoul itself was holding its breath for what he was about to say. The interviewer greeted him softly, sensing both his fragility and his resolve. He asked the first question, "How have you been?" Truly, he exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding that breath for months. For a moment, he didn't answer. He looked down at his hands, then up again. Eyes dim but honest. "I've been surviving more than living," he said quietly. It was the kind of sentence that didn't sound rehearsed. It didn't sound polished. It sounded like something pulled from the deepest part of himself, raw and trembling. The conversation drifted naturally to the topic that had lingered like a silent shadow in the industry, his separation from Ryu Da-in. A breakup that had never been publicly acknowledged, never confirmed, never denied, but one that fans had quietly suspected. The world imagined a dramatic end, or a scandal hidden behind celebrity walls. But the truth, as he revealed, was far more painful in its simplicity. He remembered their beginning, the warmth of the reading room where they met for the first time, the soft light on her face as she laughed during rehearsals, the gentle comfort of a connection that didn't require effort. Their relationship wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet companionship, tender and fragile like early spring air. But love, no matter how gentle, cannot always withstand the storms of time and distance. As their careers grew, so did the spaces between them. She had a drama scheduled in the countryside. He was filming a movie that required night shifts for 3 consecutive months. Their worlds began to shift in opposite directions. Not because either of them wanted it. Because life sometimes rearranges itself without asking permission. "We tried," he said, his voice thinning like the rain outside. "We really tried." He described their last days together not with bitterness. A sadness so delicate it felt almost holy. They had their final conversation at a small cafe in Cheongdam. One with soft lighting and antique decor. The kind of place where love stories usually begin, not end. The barista played old acoustic music in the background, and the window beside their table trembled with the wind. They sat across from each other with warm teacups between them. Steam rising gently, fading into the air just like their future together. "No one cried," he said. That made it hurt more. They walked out of the cafe separately. He watched her back turn onto the narrow alley, her beige coat disappearing slowly behind clusters of dried ginkgo leaves still clinging to branches. When she was gone, a gust of wind swept through the alley, shaking the last leaves onto the ground. "Like losing a quiet part of myself," he whispered. After the breakup, he buried himself in work. The world saw him smiling on variety shows, laughing with co-stars, greeting fans brightly at airports. But when he drove home alone, the silence in his car felt unbearable. Nights he crossed Rongho Bridge at 2 in the morning. City lights shimmering beneath the fog. The river dark and unmoving. He'd turn off the music because even sad songs felt too heavy. The loneliness was clearer without sound. He stopped visiting the cafes they used to go to. Avoided reading scripts that reminded him of the gentleness he no longer had. His apartment, normally a safe space, began to suffocate him with memories he couldn't escape. When the cameras were on, I acted fine, he admitted. He turned off. I didn't know who I was without her. Loneliness wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, lingering. Low ache under the ribs. Some nights he fell asleep on the couch with the lights still on. Other nights he stayed awake until dawn, watching the colors of soul shift from blue to gray to gold without feeling anything at all. He had not spoken of this to anyone, not to friends, not to colleagues, not even to himself out loud. That's why he came alone. That was why he chose a studio high above the ground. He could finally let the truth fall from his lips without fear of judgment. Just as the interviewer prepared to ask another question, he looked up, eyes softer than before, carrying a hint of something unexpected, something gentler. There was someone, he said quietly. Someone I didn't expect. The air in the room shifted again, not heavier, but lighter, like the faint warmth that seeps through after a long winter night. The interviewer leaned in slightly. Someone who helped you through it. His lips formed a weak but genuine smile. The kind that doesn't hide pain, but acknowledges healing. He nodded. Yes. There was a long pause before he spoke again, his gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window as though replaying a memory too meaningful to rush. It was Yoona, he said softly, almost to himself. I didn't see it coming. The studio fell silent, but it wasn't a silence born of shock. It was the silence of something tender beginning to unveil itself. The rain had softened by the time part 2 of the interview resumed, settling into a mist that clung to the windows of the small tea house in Seongsadong, where the team had moved for the second half of the shoot. The location was Lee Chae-min's choice, not for aesthetic reasons, but because, as he said quietly, this place helped me breathe again. The tea house was warm, filled with the scent of roasted barley and pressed flowers. Shelves lined in dark wood and a view of the nearly bare maple tree outside. It was the kind of space that understood silence, that welcomed sorrow without demanding explanation. Min sat by the window, his posture calmer than earlier, as though speaking his truth had loosened the knots inside his chest. The interviewer settled across from him. The ambient hush of the tea house created the first question naturally. How did Yoona come into the picture? She asked gently. The question hung in the air like a note suspended in a slow ballad. Chae-min rested his fingers around the warm teacup before speaking. She wasn't supposed to, he said, smiling at the irony. She appeared in my life in the softest way imaginable. He explained that his connection with Yoona wasn't born from romance, nor from dramatic circumstances. They had met briefly a year earlier during a commercial shoot, friendly exchanges, professional courtesy, nothing unusual. After his breakup with Da-in, when the world around him felt overwhelmingly loud, appeared again in the quietest moment. He encountered her at a charity event held at Myeongdong Cathedral. They had been invited to volunteer for a winter drive. Had arrived late, exhausted and running on autopilot. She had been placing blankets into donation boxes when their eyes met, an ordinary coincidence. But something in her expression changed when she saw him. Didn't ask anything, he said. She just looked at me for a long moment, and somehow understood. They spoke only briefly that day, but it was long enough for her to notice the fatigue beneath his polite smile. Before leaving, she placed a hand lightly on his arm and said, "Don't have to pretend around me." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't deep. It wasn't meant to be life-changing. But for someone who had been carrying pain in silence for weeks, her simplicity cracked something open. That night, he sat alone in his apartment and cried, not for Da-in, for the breakup itself, but for the realization that he had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without performing. In the following weeks, their paths crossed again in ways that felt strangely natural. Sometimes at industry gatherings, sometimes at charity shoots, sometimes in places neither expected. At one event in Seongsu, she noticed him sitting alone during a break and casually handed him a warm drink, saying, "You look like you need something hot." Pry. She didn't push. She simply offered presence in the gentlest form. As this way, he said softly, of making sadness feel less heavy just by being there. Eventually, they began meeting for coffee at a small cafe near Hanam Hill, an inconspicuous place covered in ivy, where wooden chairs creaked and sunlight filtered through paper screens in soft, dappled patterns. They sat for hours sometimes, speaking about everything except a breakup. He found comfort in the stories she shared, moments when she herself had felt overwhelmed, misunderstood, or stretched thin by the relentless expectations of the industry. She didn't try to fix me, he said. She just reminded me that healing takes time. The interviewer listened quietly, aware of how deeply meaningful this part of the story was, not scandalous, not sensational. Profoundly human. Chae talked about the days that followed, how Yoona encouraged him to run along Banpo Hanggang Park at sunrise. Not to improve his health, because morning light is kinder than night sadness. He began journaling again because she mentioned it helped her sort her thoughts. He learned to enjoy silence rather than fear it. Slowly, the colors around him regained their warmth. People think she replaced someone, murmured, but she didn't. She helped me find a version of myself I lost along the way. He shifted slightly, eyes softening. For days I didn't know who to talk to. And she'd send something simple like, "Don't skip meals," or "Walk a little today." Sounds small, but when you're hurting, small things can save you. The interviewer asked a question many viewers would wonder: did you develop feelings for her? He didn't answer right away. Instead, out the window at the red maple leaves swaying in the wind. Stretched long enough to feel cinematic, yet natural. It wasn't about falling in love, he said finally. It was about remembering I could feel again. His voice carried no regret. Just clarity. Yoona had not entered his story as a romantic twist. She entered as a quiet presence. Companion during a chapter he thought he had to walk alone. A twist that no one expected because it was gentle instead of dramatic. Healing instead of scandalous. I was at my lowest, he said. She reminded me that life can still be gentle. He wasn't ready for anything more. She wasn't asking for anything more. There was no confession. No confession needed. Just understanding. Just warmth. Just a reminder that the world still held soft spaces even when the heart felt bruised. Fans had misunderstood. Admitted, not out of malice, but because people naturally try to fill in the blanks of someone else's life. But his story with Yoona wasn't one of replacement. It was one of restoration. Losing someone taught me what I wasn't ready for, he said. Voice low but firm. Meeting her taught me what I forgot. The house had grown quieter as evening settled deeper into Seongsadong. Warm lights glowed over his face as he delivered his final thoughts, thoughts more honest than anything he had shared publicly before. I don't know what the future holds, he said. I know I'm standing again. And yes, she was part of the reason. As he stood from his seat, preparing to leave, the camera captured a final cinematic moment, his silhouette framed against the softly glowing window. Rain still clinging to the glass. The faint hum of the city rising below. He stepped outside into the cool evening. The streets were damp, shining under gentle yellow street lamps. His footsteps echoed softly as he walked down the quiet alleyway of Seongsu. Hands in pockets, breath steady. He wasn't hurrying. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't pretending. He was healing. And the narration wrote itself. Sometimes, the person who changes everything. Not the one you loved, but the one who helped you feel whole again.